Let's discuss this with Ayesha Omar in Johannesburg. She's a senior lecturer of political studies at Wits University. Ayesha, it's good to have you on this news hour. The Marikana massacre was the deadliest incident of violence since the end of apartheid. Why is it so significant now in a post-apartheid South Africa?
Good evening to your viewers, and thank you so much for having me on your show. Well, absolutely. Indeed, today, the 16th of August, marks 10 years since the Marikana massacre, one of the most devastating and deplorable events of political violence in South Africa's recent post-apartheid democratic history. It, as your insert mentioned, involved the killing of 34 miners by the South African Police Service at the Lonmin Platinum Mine in Marikana in the Northwest Province. And the massacre was a consequence of a strike actions which for days had developed into a large protest movement where miners were essentially pursuing better material conditions, including a decent living wage and securing some form of economic and social agency. Now, Lonmin, a large London-based platinum mining entity during this period, had over 28,000 miners in its employ, workers who largely provided cheap labor in a context of inequality and poverty, and where economic and racial exclusion instantiated a long history of labor struggle. Marikana, for many South Africans in this way, is a significant inflection point. It represents the first democratic massacre. That is the first time the democratic ANC-led government was complicit in an act of gratuitous and contemptuous violence against indigent black workers, the very people whose political views and aspirations they were elected to represent. And these actions are considered to be a negation of what democracy ought to constitute, and it mirrors the painful history of South Africa's past, the state-led violence, for example, of Sharpeville in 1960 and the Soweto uprising of black school children in 1976.
Ayesha, so many people, not just in South Africa, you and I are both South Africans, we watched this play out over the last 10 years. There's been no accountability. Why is that? We've had commissions of inquiry, but nobody's actually been held accountable. There's been no justice for the victims and survivors of Marikana.
Well, absolutely. The question is really this, and this is the quagmire, isn't it? A decade on since Marikana, questions of police accountability, questions of justice and reparations, as well as civil society calls for full disclosure continue to be raised. Following the release of the findings of the Farlam Commission of Inquiry in 2015, central concerns around the lack of accountability, poor public order policing, the weaknesses of political leadership, Lonmin's approach to negotiations, and its failure to protect its workers were all highlighted as significant issues, which the inquiry flagged as warranting further investigation. Yet, as we speak, high-level political figures have been exonerated, including, crucially, the then South African Police Commissioner, General Ria Piecha, whose testimony did lead to a suspension in 2015, but nothing further by way of acting on the findings of the Farlam Commission. For example, to date, not a single police officer has been charged, and the National Prosecuting Authority still hasn't indicated whether it will prosecute anyone for the 34 deaths. The South African government, on the other hand, while acknowledging that the brutality and violence should never have occurred, have not provided compensation to the families of the workers who were killed or to those who were injured or wrongfully arrested. And so these public statements of condemnation by the government really ring hollow for the dozens of families whose lives were devastatingly altered by this event, and who continue to dwell in shack settlements with the structural realities of their lives in the large part materially unchanged.
Ayesha Omar, appreciate your analysis and putting that all into context for us live from Johannesburg. Thanks, Ayesha.
Thank you so much for having me.